Now what the hell do you think you're doing with that tin star, boy? Watch that boy shit, redneck. You talking to the Sheriff of Rockridge. For decades, Blazing Saddles has been dissected, debated, and quoted to death, but there's one detail fans have consistently missed. It's not a deleted scene, a secret cameo, or some behind the feud. It's right there on screen, hiding in plain sight, delivered with such subtlety that even die-hard fans never caught it. Are you crazy? It's frivolous. Right. And I started to argue, and then I argued for about 20 minutes until I was... Gene Wilder finally confirmed it. And once you see it, it changes how you view the entire film. What if the most outrageous comedy of its era only worked because of the quietest performance in the room? There's one moment, often overlooked, that held the film together. And it wasn't written into the script. The role that was never meant for him. When Mel Brooks began filming Blazing Saddles, the role of the Waco Kid was already filled by Gig Young, a seasoned Hollywood actor and Oscar winner. On paper, Young seemed like the perfect fit, a dignified performer who could lend credibility to the aging gunslinger role. However, behind the scenes, things fell apart almost immediately. On the very first day of filming, Young began to exhibit visible signs of distress. He was sweating, shaking, and slurring his lines. Some on set initially assumed he was method acting, but the truth was far more serious. Young was suffering from acute alcohol withdrawal, and by mid-morning he had collapsed. Production was forced to halt. The studio had a problem, and Brooks needed a replacement fast. Instead of holding auditions or negotiating with agents, Brooks made a personal call to someone he trusted completely: Gene Wilder. The two had worked together previously on The Producers, and Brooks knew that Wilder could deliver under pressure. What's surprising is how little Wilder needed to know before saying yes. According to Brooks, Wilder didn't ask for the script, the pay, or even a description of the role. He simply agreed and flew out the next day. This wasn't a calculated career move. It was a favor between collaborators and possibly a rescue mission for a film in jeopardy. Gene Wilder arrived on set in less than 24 hours, still jet-lagged, but ready to step in and take over a role he'd never rehearsed. There's an almost mythic quality to how quickly Wilder took command of the character. While most actors prepare for weeks or months, Wilder had only hours. But by the time the cameras rolled, he was already inhabiting the Waco Kid like he'd lived in the character's boots for years. What made his performance so effective wasn't just his talent. It was his willingness to show up fully present in the chaos. His arrival not only saved the film from early collapse, but also shifted the tone of the entire character. Would the Waco Kid have been as dryly philosophical or quietly tragic if Young had stayed? We'll never know, but Wilder's take became instantly iconic. Still, it raises an interesting question. Was Wilder always destined for the role, even if the casting didn't say so at first? Brooks never framed it as fate, but he was clear on one thing. Once Wilder stepped into the part, there was no going back. What began as an emergency recast became one of the most celebrated performances in comedy history. The Waco Kid wasn't just a backup plan, it became a benchmark for comedic subtlety. And it all started with a phone call in the middle of a production disaster. Just as Wilder stepped in to rescue the role, what he did with it next was something no one on set expected. And it changed everything. The genius of Gene's quiet performance. Gene Wilder's decision to play the Waco Kid straight was no accident. It was a deliberate choice he made before he even stepped on set. According to Mel Brooks, Wilder agreed to join the production under one clear condition. He wasn't going to play the character for laughs. In a film overflowing with slapstick, absurdism, and fourth-wall-breaking chaos, Wilder insisted on delivering a restrained, almost mournful performance. This wasn't a comedic actor trying to steal scenes. It was someone who understood the power of contrast. Wilder didn't push his lines or exaggerate his expressions. Instead, he leaned into stillness, giving the Waco Kid a kind of quiet gravity that allowed the surrounding madness to flourish. This approach wasn't just a creative preference, it was a calculated move that grounded the entire film. Mel Brooks later credited Wilder's subtlety with giving Blazing Saddles its backbone. While characters like Hedley Lamar and Mongo pushed absurdity to the edge, the Waco Kid stood apart as a ghost of the Old West, burned out, reflective, and strangely dignified. The now famous jailhouse scene, where the kid explains his shaky hands and lost nerve, wasn't just played for irony. Wilder delivered it with a weariness that bordered on tragic. It made the line funny, yes, but also human. Without Wilder's internalized approach, the film's satire might have slipped into farce. Interestingly, Wilder's insistence on playing it straight may have also reflected his own discomfort with excess. Those who worked with him often described him as thoughtful, methodical, and deeply invested in emotional authenticity. In that sense, the Waco Kid became an extension of Wilder's personal ethos, an observer who didn't need to shout to be heard. Even when delivering absurd lines, his timing was precise, his tone controlled. It's no surprise that audiences often quote his lines, not because they're the loudest, but because they're the most unexpected. In a movie built on punchlines, Wilder's performance was the pause that made the punchlines land harder. So, was Gene Wilder's approach a risk? Arguably, yes. In a lesser actor's hands, playing the role with such restraint might have faded into the background, but Wilder understood something critical about comedy. Contrast enhances absurdity. By refusing to play the clown, he made everyone else's madness funnier. His stillness became the eye of the storm. That choice, calm, confident, and controlled, became the performance that continues to define the film decades later. The dream team that never happened. Before Blazing Saddles hit theaters, Richard Pryor's name was closely tied to the project, not just as a writer, but as the actor originally slated to play Sheriff Bart. Mel Brooks, recognizing Pryor's raw comedic power and cultural relevance, had championed him for the role. His involvement as a co-writer was crucial in shaping the film's voice, especially its unfiltered commentary on race and power in America. But while Pryor's contributions behind the scenes remained intact, his chances of starring on screen were abruptly cut short. Warner Brothers executives, wary of his public controversies and substance use issues, ultimately blocked his casting. Their decision reshaped the film's chemistry and altered a potential turning point in comedy history. Gene Wilder later acknowledged this lost opportunity, often reflecting on what the film could have been with Pryor beside him. The two had a proven rapport in later films like Silver Streak and Stir Crazy, where their comedic timing and contrast created some of the most memorable duos in film. Had Pryor taken on the role of Bart in Blazing Saddles, it would have marked the start of that partnership years earlier. Wilder never expressed resentment, but he did recognize how their chemistry might have shifted the tone of the film. Would the Waco Kid's quiet sadness have played differently next to Pryor's explosive wit? The question lingers, even decades later. Despite the casting change, Pryor's fingerprints are still all over the movie. His voice is embedded in the rhythm of the jokes and the sharpness of the satire. Cleavon Little delivered a powerful performance as Bart, but the underlying edge in many of the lines was pure Pryor. Wilder himself credited Pryor's script contributions with giving the film its bite. In many ways, Pryor shaped the movie's emotional honesty and refusal to soften its racial commentary, even if he never appeared on screen. It's rare for a performer to influence a film so deeply without physically being part of it, but Pryor managed to do exactly that. Ultimately, Blazing Saddles remains a landmark in comedic history, But it's hard not to imagine the alternate version, where Wilder and Pryor first teamed up amid the dusty streets and absurd chaos. The fact that this pairing didn't happen sooner might feel like a missed opportunity, but perhaps it also made their later collaborations even more impactful. Still, for fans of both icons, the thought of them sharing the screen in this groundbreaking satire remains one of Hollywood's biggest what-ifs. Off-screen mentorship and meltdown moments. Despite the absurdity of Blazing Saddles, the atmosphere behind the scenes was often far from lighthearted. The pressure of pushing creative boundaries, managing studio pushback, and navigating unpredictable on-set dynamics created a high-stress environment. Gene Wilder, by most accounts, became a quiet, stabilizing force during production. While Mel Brooks led with chaotic energy and relentless vision, it was Wilder's calm demeanor that helped ground the cast and crew during tense moments. Those who worked on the film recalled that Wilder rarely raised his voice or drew attention to himself. But his presence was reassuring, a kind of emotional anchor amid the storm of improvisation, long hours, and studio anxiety. Wilder's influence extended beyond performance. Between takes, he was known to share advice and help younger or less experienced actors refine their delivery, not in a grand lecture-style way, but through subtle guidance, small adjustments to timing, emphasis, or tone. His years of stage work and experience under Brooks on The Producers had taught him the value of restraint and rhythm. For some, his mentorship wasn't immediately visible, but became clear in hindsight. He didn't demand attention, yet his influence shaped several scenes from the margins. Some crew members have even described him as the unofficial director of tone, ensuring that the balance between satire and sincerity didn't tip too far in either direction. One of Wilder's lesser-known contributions during the production of Blazing Saddles involved something that wasn't even part of the film itself: the development of young Frankenstein. During downtime on set, Wilder began talking with Brooks about a new idea he'd been mulling over. What if the descendant of Dr. Frankenstein wanted nothing to do with his family legacy? Life. Life. Do you hear me? Give my creation life. That seed of an idea, first shared during breaks in filming, would eventually become one of the most iconic horror comedies ever made. Wilder's ability to switch gears, balancing absurd comedy in one moment and crafting a wholly different concept in the next, speaks to the kind of creative multitasking few actors could manage. It also showed the level of trust and collaboration between Wilder and Brooks, a partnership that produced more than just laughs. So while audiences remember Gene Wilder's performance in Blazing Saddles for his stillness and wit, his off-screen role may have been equally important. He kept the production steady during unpredictable moments, supported his peers, and quietly helped shape the future of comedy filmmaking. In a movie defined by chaos, Wilder's behind-the-scenes presence was anything but. He was the calm at the center of the storm, and without that calm, it's fair to wonder if the film would have held together at all. The tragedy beneath the laughter. Gene Wilder's portrayal of the Waco Kid in Blazing Saddles is often remembered for its deadpan delivery and perfect comedic timing. But beneath the surface, Wilder layered his performance with a surprising amount of emotional weight. Far from being just a drunken gunslinger trope, the Waco Kid is portrayed as a deeply damaged man, haunted by his past and disillusioned with the world around him. Wilder, known for his sensitivity as an actor, treated the role with unexpected seriousness. His character's nervous hand tremors and detached demeanor weren't just gags. They were subtle indicators of trauma, perhaps even post-traumatic stress, which Wilder chose to play as real rather than exaggerated. This deeper approach set the Waco Kid apart from the broader characters that surrounded him. In a film where many performances veered toward outrageous satire, Wilder's performance suggested that the kids and withdrawal were rooted in genuine despair. Viewers who revisit the film with this in mind often pick up on how Wilder underplays scenes others might have played for slapstick. In one key moment, when the kid recalls being the fastest draw in the West, there's no boast in his tone, only regret. It feels less like nostalgia and more like a confession. These nuances don't immediately register during a first viewing, but they linger, quietly reshaping how the character is remembered. What's particularly notable is how Wilder used stillness and silence to signal the Waco kid's pain. Comedy typically rewards speed and energy, but Wilder's power came from his restraint. His hesitations, pauses, and quiet reactions spoke volumes, creating a sense of depth that's easy to miss if you're only watching for punchlines. Mel Brooks himself later acknowledged that Gene brought an emotional intelligence to the role that wasn't necessarily in the script. This wasn't a case of a comedic actor trying to be dramatic. It was a case of an actor recognizing that the funniest characters are often the ones who hurt the most. In The Waco Kid, that hurt was never front and center, but it was always there, just behind the smirk. In hindsight, Wilder's performance adds a layer of humanity to a film that often thrives on irreverence. His Waco Kid doesn't just make us laugh. He makes us wonder what happened before the story began. Why did he give up on the world? What did he lose that made him retreat into booze and bitterness? These questions aren't answered directly in the film, but Wilder's performance makes them impossible to ignore. It's a reminder that even in parody, real emotion has a place. And in Blazing Saddles, it quietly rides in on a trembling hand and a weary gaze. But just as Wilder's quiet sadness gave the Waco Kid surprising depth, what happened behind the scenes revealed an entirely different challenge: keeping a straight face. Scenes you never saw. Despite Gene Wilder's calm on-screen presence in Blazing Saddles, many of his most memorable moments nearly didn't make it into the final film. Not because of performance issues, but because the cast and crew couldn't stop laughing. Wilder's subtle delivery and perfectly timed lines often caught people off guard, making it difficult to get clean takes. Multiple crew members have recalled that some of the film's funniest moments were shot several times simply because someone off-camera would break into laughter. In several cases, even Mel Brooks himself had to be removed from set temporarily because his laughter was bleeding into the audio track. The challenge wasn't getting Wilder to deliver. It was getting everyone else to hold it together while he did. One recurring issue during production involved scenes where Wilder's dry responses would land so unexpectedly that camera operators and sound techs couldn't stifle their reactions. These weren't broad punchlines designed to cue applause. They were quiet, offbeat lines that worked because of their contrast to the madness around him. For example, the simple way he delivered lines like, "You've got to remember these are just simple farmers. These are people of the land, the common clay of the New West. You know, morons," caused more takes to be scrapped than almost any other scene. Behind the camera, people lost it. According to some reports, even Cleavon Little had difficulty staying in character during those takes. Some of Wilder's deeper character moments, particularly those exploring the Waco Kid's emotional state, ended up being cut from the final film. There are accounts of longer scenes that delved further into the kid's background, moments that reportedly offered more introspection than the film's fast pace could accommodate. While these scenes haven't been officially released or confirmed in full detail, members of the crew have mentioned that some of Wilder's best dramatic work was left on the cutting room floor. It raises an interesting question. Would those quieter moments have slowed the film down? Or would they have added even more depth to a character already full of hidden complexity? Regardless, what remains in the final version of Blazing Saddles is enough to understand Wilder's impact, but those missing pieces continue to intrigue fans and film historians. What might we have seen if the crew could have kept a straight face? If the studio had allowed a few more quiet moments of reflection between the chaos? These behind-the-scenes stories don't just illustrate how difficult it was to shoot around Gene Wilder's genius. They also highlight how his performance operated on multiple levels. Even in a film full of noise, the moments you couldn't hear because the crew was laughing too hard might have been some of the most revealing. Wilder's quiet defiance of Hollywood cliches. Gene Wilder's approach to comedy in Blazing Saddles stood in stark contrast to the expectations of Hollywood at the time. While many comedic actors relied on exaggerated expressions, over-the-top delivery, and physical antics to land laughs, Wilder chose subtlety. His portrayal of the Waco Kid avoided the typical comedic tropes. There was no mugging for the camera, no punchline winks, and no desperation to get a laugh. Instead, Wilder let silence, illness, and timing carry his scenes. This was particularly evident in his jail cell introduction, one of the film's most memorable sequences. Slouched in a bunk, half and barely interested, he delivered lines with minimal effort but maximum effect. The moment didn't shout its importance, it whispered it, and that made it unforgettable. What made this performance so radical wasn't just that it broke comedic norms, it defied the visual language that studio comedies had been built on for decades. In a film where everyone else was pushing boundaries and going big, Wilder pulled back. This decision wasn't accidental, it was intentional, and it was risky. Comedy, especially in the 1970s, rewarded extroversion. Yet Wilder showed that restraint could be just as powerful when he delivered lines like, "Are we awake? Are we awake? We're not sure." With dry sarcasm and unblinking calm, the humor landed not because he acted funny, but because he acted real. That grounded realism made the Waco Kid seem like a man who had truly seen too much, something far deeper than what the script alone suggested. This quiet defiance extended to Wilder's broader career philosophy. He didn't aim to dominate a scene or overpower other actors. Instead, he played off them, reacting rather than performing, listening more than talking. It's an approach that respected both the material and the audience. In Blazing Saddles, this philosophy allowed the absurd elements to shine without overwhelming the emotional undercurrent his character brought. His decision not to compete for laughs, but to support the tone of the film, revealed a rare confidence. He trusted the story, the timing, and the intelligence of the viewer. This made the comedy sharper, not louder. Ultimately, Wilder's refusal to conform to comedic cliches is part of what makes his performance so enduring. By underplaying a character in a film built on exaggeration, he created a kind of comedic counterbalance that brought surprising depth. His quiet delivery in a loud film was not a weakness. It was the glue that held the chaos together. In doing so, Wilder not only challenged what audiences expected from a comic lead, he redefined it, a career pivot born on set. The origin of Young Frankenstein, one of Gene Wilder's most acclaimed works, can be traced directly to the set of Blazing Saddles. During filming, in the midst of the controlled chaos that surrounded the production, Wilder quietly shared a new idea with Mel Brooks. No trouble at all from Gene Wilder. There was one night, it got to be 5:30 or 6, and I said, "I want you to do the wacky scene." It wasn't a grand pitch or a formal proposal. It was a passing conversation between takes. Wilder wondered aloud, what if the grandson of Dr. Frankenstein was desperate to distance himself from the family legacy? This stray thought would eventually become the foundation for Young Frankenstein, a film that would redefine horror comedy. What's remarkable is that this iconic concept was born not in a writer's room or studio meeting, but during the downtime of another film, already pushing comedic boundaries. At first, Mel Brooks wasn't convinced. According to both men, Brooks initially brushed the idea off. He was focused on Blazing Saddles, a production already loaded with creative and logistical challenges. But Wilder persisted, not with pressure, but with passion. He wrote a draft, believing in the idea enough to do the work without a guarantee. When Brooks finally read it, he quickly changed his mind. A combination of satire, homage, and character-driven storytelling in Wilder's script was undeniable. Within days, what had started as a casual thought became a serious creative pursuit. Without the downtime and collaboration of Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein might have remained an unrealized idea. This shift marked a major pivot in Wilder's career. Though he had already proven himself as a capable comedic actor, Young Frankenstein cemented him as a creative force behind the camera as well. He didn't just star in the film, he co-wrote it and helped shape its tone, pacing, and emotional core. That level of involvement signaled a new phase in his career, one where he wasn't just interpreting someone else's vision, but helping define it from the start. His work on Young Frankenstein displayed the same instincts that had made his performance in Blazing Saddles so distinctive, an emphasis on balance, restraint, and emotional truth, even in the middle of absurdity. It's fair to say that without Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein would not exist in the form we know today, if at all. The creative environment Brooks and Wilder cultivated on that Western spoof provided not just comic breakthroughs, but a fertile ground for new ideas. Wilder's pivot from performer to creator didn't come with fanfare. It came from quiet determination and perfect timing. In retrospect, Blazing Saddles wasn't just a comedic landmark, it was a launchpad for one of the greatest genre parodies ever made, Gene Wilder versus the studio system. Gene Wilder's role in Blazing Saddles extended well beyond performance. He also stood behind Mel Brooks during the film's most contentious battles with the studio. From the outset, Warner Brothers executives were uneasy with the film's racial satire, profanity, and its direct confrontations with American social norms. Multiple studio memos called for script changes, toned-down language, and removal of key scenes that addressed racism too openly. Despite not being a producer or director, Wilder strongly supported Brooks' vision and resisted attempts to dilute the film's impact. He believed the film's value came from its willingness to make audiences uncomfortable in service of a deeper truth. Wilder's support was not loud or dramatic, but it was unwavering. In private conversations and production meetings, he reportedly urged Brooks to stick to the original tone and message, even if that risked the studio pulling support. Wilder understood the stakes, not just for Blazing Saddles, but for the kind of comedy he believed in. Sanitizing the film would have robbed it of its core purpose, satire that revealed ugly truths through laughter. When Brooks was pressured to rewrite scenes involving Sheriff Bart's racial slurs, or to tone down the portrayal of the people's ignorance, Wilder backed him, knowing that the shock was part of the satire. Without that edge, the film would have lost its bite. This quiet resistance to studio interference reflected Wilder's broader attitude toward the Hollywood system. He wasn't antagonistic, but he was skeptical of executives who prioritized market comfort over creative honesty. In interviews, Wilder later noted that satire was never meant to feel safe. Its power came from exposing contradictions and hypocrisies, especially in institutions like law enforcement, politics, and entertainment. Blazing Saddles wasn't just a comedy to him, it was a statement. And if that statement caused discomfort, so be it. Wilder wasn't looking to audiences from a fence. He was helping to hold up a mirror, however unflattering. It's worth asking whether Blazing Saddles would have survived in its raw form without Wilder's backing. Brooks had the vision, but it was Wilder's credibility, particularly after the success of The Producers, that gave his defense extra weight. He wasn't just a performer, he was a respected collaborator, willing to challenge institutional control. In a film known for breaking every rule of polite comedy, Wilder's off-screen stance was just as subversive. He didn't shout or protest, he stood firm. And that quiet resolve helped preserve one of the most fearless comedies in American film history. While Wilder fought to protect the film's boldest ideas, what he left behind on screen quietly reshaped how comedy could carry weight without shouting. The legacy Gene helped cement. Gene Wilder's portrayal of the Waco Kid in Blazing Saddles did more than simply entertain. It gave the film its emotional center. I don't know if you ever heard of me before, but I used to be called the Waco Kid. The Waco Kid. In a movie defined by irreverence, outrageous satire, and high-volume absurdity, Wilder's still emotionally grounded performance stood out as the anchor that held the chaos together. Without his calm presence, the film may have leaned too far into caricature and lost its narrative coherence. The Waco Kid wasn't just comic relief, he was the audience's way into the story, a character who reflected on the madness around him rather than contributing to it. That restraint helped shape Blazing Saddles into something more than parody. It made it endure. It's worth noting how unusual this contribution was for a comedic film of its time. Most comic roles in the 1970s were defined by spectacle or verbal assault, loud, broad performances that aimed for instant laughs. Wilder's work was the opposite. He was understated, internally focused, and emotionally textured. That nuance gave the film balance. His scenes, particularly the introspective ones, made space for the satire to land with weight. The Waco Kid, with his haunted eyes and dry delivery, made the jokes funnier by contrast, while also suggesting that behind the satire was something real. It was this layering that gave the film staying power. Over time, Wilder's contribution has become more widely recognized. While the louder performances and punchlines were what audiences remembered at first, it was Wilder's subtle work that aged best. His performance now serves as a benchmark in how to use restraint in comedy, a reminder that less can indeed be more. That influence is part of why Blazing Saddles was selected for preservation in the National Film Registry. The Library of Congress doesn't just recognize films for popularity, it preserves those that are culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. Wilder's role helped the film check all three boxes. His presence elevated the entire production from provocative comedy to cultural commentary. So what legacy did Gene Wilder help cement? Not just that of Blazing Saddles, but of a particular kind of comedy, one that allows room for intelligence, sadness, and silence. Wilder proved that it's possible to be hilarious without being loud, and to be revolutionary without being brash. His work in Blazing Saddles remains a masterclass in restraint, and a foundational example of how great comedy often hides in plain sight. Decades later, the film continues to resonate, and Wilder's Waco Kid remains its most quietly radical voice. If this gave you a new way to look at Blazing Saddles, don't forget to hit that like button and drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear what you never noticed until now. Subscribe for more behind-the-scenes revelations, and tap the bell so you never miss what's next. And if you're ready for more, click the video on your screen now. Trust us, you won't want to miss it.